January 5, 1942. Tokyo roars with songs, flags, and parades celebrating the Pacific War, but you and I are nowhere near the crowds. We are inside the dim plotting room of the battleship Yamato, watching Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto bend over a vast map of the Pacific theater. Lines mark Pearl Harbor, the Philippines, Malaya, Rabaul, the Solomon Islands, and a small green shape called Guadalcanal. Yet here the paradox appears. The man who conceived the attack on Pearl Harbor does not look like a conqueror. While politicians and generals toast an eternal empire, Yamamoto is already staring at the point on his chart where that dream might snap. If Japan chooses the wrong direction for this second phase of the campaign, fleets will be lost, armies isolated, and the empire shouting in triumph in Tokyo today will begin marching toward defeat. In this story, we follow that chain of decisions, wounded pride, and one crucial reconnaissance search that never took off over a narrow strait near Guadalcanal, the blind spot that helped turn a string of early victories into the first real crack in Japan's Pacific gamble. At the start of 1942, the reports on Yamamoto's desk read like a ledger of success. Japanese forces are overrunning the Philippines, British defenses in Malaya are collapsing, and the Dutch East Indies are under heavy assault. Many staff officers come to believe that momentum is Japan's best weapon. Yamamoto refuses to share that optimism. He has walked through American shipyards, watched oil tanks stretching to the horizon, and seen assembly lines that can turn out aircraft by the hundreds. He understands that the United States, if given time, can replace every ship sunk and every plane lost, and then outbuild anything Japan can dream of. Quietly, he warns that the empire may enjoy only a short window of advantage, perhaps a year and a half, before the balance of power tilts. In that brief period, Japan must gain a position strong enough to negotiate peace. If it fails, it will be dragged into a long war it cannot win. Inside Tokyo, arguments erupt over the direction of the next blow. One group wants to turn north and attack the Soviet Union, but the army is already stuck in a grinding war in China and Southeast Asia and refuses to open another massive front. Another faction dreams of the Indian Ocean, strike toward Ceylon, wreck the British Eastern Fleet, threaten India, and indirectly support German operations around the Caucasus oil fields. On paper it looks grand, but it would stretch Japanese logistics and demand resources the army will not spare. A third camp looks south and east, toward New Guinea, the Solomon Islands, New Caledonia, Fiji, Samoa, and the lifeline between the United States and Australia. Cut that route, they argue, and the Allies will be split into two isolated theaters. Yamamoto sees a deeper problem. The Pearl Harbor strike, for all its drama, left American aircraft carriers untouched. Those carriers, with their trained pilots and deck crews, are the true core of U.S. naval strength. Battleships and harbor facilities can be replaced over time. Elite aviators cannot. Japan has gained territory but not real safety. For him, the second phase of the Pacific War must include a decisive battle at sea that shatters the American carrier force. From that idea comes an elaborate plan to lure U.S. carriers into a trap near Midway Atoll, paired with a diversion in the Aleutians to pull American attention north. If both parts succeed, Japan could extend its frontier toward Hawaii and perhaps force the United States to bargain from a weaker position. While these plans are being refined aboard Yamato, events on land move quickly. In February 1942, Singapore falls. The Gibraltar of the East, supposed to anchor British power in Asia, surrenders in a shock that reverberates from London to India. Yamamoto had once hoped that such a blow might push Britain toward negotiation, especially with its empire stretched across multiple fronts. But before that possibility can even be explored, another event transforms the psychological landscape. In April, American B-25 bombers thunder over Tokyo in the Doolittle raid. Militarily, the attack is minor. Politically and emotionally, it is enormous. Civilians who believed distance kept them safe watch enemy aircraft drop bombs over their own capital. For hardline nationalists, this humiliation demands revenge. The answer, they insist, is to push Japan's defensive perimeter farther out so that no enemy bomber can reach the home islands again. The appetite for new bases and deeper expansion grows even stronger. Then in June, Midway explodes into disaster. Yamamoto's carefully laid trap is turned against him. American codebreakers, bold carrier commanders, and well-timed strikes combine to sink 4 Japanese fleet carriers and many of their best aircrews in a single battle. Inside the Navy, the truth is clear. Japan's carrier force has suffered a wound it will never fully recover from. Yet the overall strategy does not simply collapse. Even as Midway's wreckage sinks, Japanese forces continue to expand southward. Rabaul, on New Britain, becomes a major stronghold for ships and aircraft. From there, Japanese bombers and fighters fan out over New Guinea and the Solomon Islands. They seize Salamaua and Lee along New Guinea's northern coast and push toward Port Moresby, while their navy moves into Chalagi and the Solomons and builds a seaplane base to extend reconnaissance over the Coral Sea. Earlier in May, at the Battle of the Coral Sea, Allied naval forces managed to halt a seaborne assault on Port Moresby, but that victory does not erase the fact that Japan still holds powerful positions across the region. If Port Moresby falls and Japanese airfields multiply across New Guinea and the Solomons, northern Australia could sit under regular attack. Supply convoys from the United States would run past enemy bases and aircraft. General Douglas MacArthur, now commanding Allied forces in the area, argues for a strong counteroffensive toward the Bismarck Archipelago, hit New Britain and New Ireland, then strike at Rabaul itself. To do that, he calls for multiple American carriers, 1,000 aircraft, and several divisions of ground troops. In Washington, Admiral Ernest J. King looks at the same map and sees limits. At this stage of 1942, the United States has only a few operational carriers in the Pacific. Japan, despite its Midway losses, still holds a numerical edge and operates closer to its own bases. A massive push straight at Rabaul would concentrate precious naval resources under MacArthur's control and risk overextension. Instead, King proposes a more modest but realistic plan, an amphibious offensive in the southern Solomons under naval command, aimed at blunting Japanese expansion and protecting the sea route to Australia. After intense debate, the Joint Chiefs agree to a compromise. Phase 1 will be a Navy-led operation to seize Chalagi and nearby islands and to deny Japan a key seaplane base. Later stages, driving further through the Solomons and New Guinea, will be coordinated with MacArthur. On the early planning charts, Guadalcanal is barely more than a name. It draws attention only when intelligence officers start reporting that Japanese construction units are clearing a flat strip of ground on the island's north coast. That strip is the real threat. If Japan finishes an airfield there, bombers could fly from Guadalcanal and threaten the shipping route between the United States and Australia. The new field would be a knife positioned across Allied logistics. King and his planners conclude that the only answer is to take it before it becomes operational. Guadalcanal, once an afterthought, suddenly becomes the focus of the first major American offensive in the Pacific. To execute this operation, the United States has to improvise amphibious warfare on a scale it has not attempted in the modern era. Vice Admiral Robert L. Gormley is given command of the South Pacific area. Under him, Rear Admiral Richmond Kelly Turner is tasked with organizing the amphibious force, and Major General Alexander A. Vandegrift's 1st Marine Division is chosen as the assault force for Chalagi and Guadalcanal. The problems start immediately. Ports on the American West Coast load transports in a rush. Ammunition, food, fuel, tools, and vehicles are crammed on board in whatever holds happen to be open. Ideally, the ships would be reorganized at a better-equipped staging port, but facilities in places like Naumea are limited, and the timetable is tight. This means that when the Marines eventually hit the beaches, Supplies will come ashore in a confusing jumble instead of in neat waves matching their needs. Training exposes more weaknesses. A rehearsal landing on Coral Island in Fiji at the end of July is chaotic. Many landing craft miss their timings or beaches, and once troops get ashore, units mill around without clear direction. Van de Grift watches the exercise and understands that the real operation will likely unfold in the same confusion, but under enemy fire. There is no time for another full-scale practice. Intelligence now suggests that the Japanese airfield on Guadalcanal is close to completion, and every day of delay could allow enemy aircraft to begin using it. Gormley, pessimistic by nature, travels to meet MacArthur in Melbourne. Both men highlight shortages of land-based aircraft and stress that they cannot guarantee steady air cover over an invasion force in the Southern Solomons. They recommend that Washington postpone the operation until more aircraft and ships are available. Admiral King rejects this. He warns Gormley that the forces on hand are not ideal, but makes it clear that the landings must proceed regardless. Waiting, in his view, would allow the Japanese southern perimeter to harden into a wall that would later cost far more lives to breach. On the Japanese side, attention remains locked on New Guinea. In July, additional troops land near Buna, with plans to build airstrips supporting another push toward Port Moresby. Japanese bombers and fighters continue to hit Allied positions and ports in the region. At Rabaul, Yamamoto prepares for future operations, shifting air groups as needed. Crucially, however, Japanese intelligence fails to detect the scale or purpose of the Allied buildup aimed at the Solomons. Months of victory have shaped a belief that the Allies are still reeling, still reactive, not yet capable of a serious large-scale amphibious strike deep inside the Japanese perimeter. By late July, the Allied convoy is ready. Transports, cargo ships, cruisers, destroyers, and carriers gather from California, Pearl Harbor, Naumea, and Samoa. On July 28th, senior commanders meet aboard the carrier Saratoga. Admiral Frank Jack Fletcher, whose carriers must shield the landings, tells them bluntly that he will only stay close to Guadalcanal for a short period. He believes his small carrier force cannot be risked under prolonged threat from land-based Japanese aircraft at Rabaul. Turner, seeing how exposed the Marines will be without that cover, argues that the risk has already been accepted at higher levels and that the carriers must stay as long as possible. The disagreement remains unresolved, but everyone leaves the meeting knowing that carrier support may vanish sooner than they would like. On July 31st, the Marines re-embark, and the convoy heads toward the Solomons. On August 4th and 5th, thick cloud and rain squalls move across the route, hiding the fleet from Japanese search planes. Only a few enemy patrol aircraft take to the air from Rabaul during this period, and none cross the convoy's path. Japanese commanders remain focused on their own operations. The notion that an entire American invasion force is already bearing down on Guadalcanal simply does not fit their assumptions about Allied capabilities. Dawn on August 7th brings a sudden change. The weather clears, revealing land on the horizon. At 5:30 a.m., General Quarters sounds across the task force. Half an hour later, aircraft burst from the decks of Enterprise, Saratoga, and Wasp. Dive bombers and fighters streak toward Guadalcanal, Chalagi, Gavutu, and Tanambogo. Their first targets are the seaplane base, the almost finished airstrip, and coastal defenses. At Chalagi, bombs and strafing runs rip through floatplanes moored in the harbor. On Guadalcanal's north shore, explosions tear into fuel dumps, workshops, and barracks around the construction site. Marines crowding the rails of their transports watch the bombardment grow. Heavy cruisers and destroyers open fire from offshore, their salvos walking across the beaches and into the tree line. On Guadalcanal, most of the Japanese personnel are construction workers and lightly armed guards. Under the shock of bombardment, they retreat inland rather than fight a hopeless stand on the sand. When the first waves of Marines step ashore around 9:00 a.m., they find silence instead of machine gun fire. Moving inland, they discover abandoned camps, scattered tools, and even meals left unfinished where shells smashed through mess tents. On the far side of the narrow channel, however, Chalagi and the nearby islets are another world. There, Japanese naval troops and air personnel have dug into caves, trenches, and rocky bunkers overlooking an old cricket ground and steep ravines. Colonel Merritt, Red, Edson's Marine Raiders land, push through thick jungle and run straight into carefully prepared machine gun positions. Every advance requires crawling up slopes, hurling grenades and satchel charges into openings, and then storming bunkers whose defenders usually choose death over surrender. Snipers hidden in trees and structures fire into the backs of passing units. At night, Japanese soldiers launch sudden counterattacks against the Marine perimeter, slipping close in the dark before charging with grenades and bayonets. Many fall within sight of the command posts, but not before inflicting painful losses. On Gavatu and Tanambogo, Marine units face small but formidable fortresses. Steep hills rise over cramped landing beaches, and Japanese defenders fire down from caves and gun pits etched into the slopes. Early waves of Marines are raked by rifle and machine gun fire even before their landing craft reach the sand. Tanks that get ashore are surrounded by infantry jamming tools into their treads and trying to burn them with fuel-soaked cloth. For a time, some Marines are stranded on piers and narrow strips of land, exposed to fire from above until reinforcements fight their way across the causeway. By the time the last cave positions are cleared, nearly every Japanese defender on those islands has been killed. While the ground fight rages, the air war erupts overhead. Chalaga's radio operators manage to send brief reports of the American assault before their station is overrun. Those messages reach Rabaul just as Japanese pilots are preparing for routine missions over New Guinea. Orders change within minutes. Twin-engine bombers and Zero fighters are retasked to strike the Allied invasion force. The bombers lift off and begin the long, exhausting flight down the island chain. Along their route, Allied coastwatchers hidden in the hills spot them and transmit warnings. Those signals race through headquarters and out to the fleet, giving carriers time to launch fighters. When the Japanese bombers finally reach the waters around Guadalcanal at midday, they meet wildcats diving from above and dense anti-aircraft fire from ships and shore. Many bombers are shot down before they can aim. Others press through and manage to hit a transport and damage destroyers, but they cannot stop the landings. In the swirling dogfights, the Zero's superior maneuverability is clear. Yet American pilots begin to discover the value of their tougher Wildcats, planes that can survive hits and still get home. By nightfall on August 7th, the Allies seem to be in control. On Guadalcanal, Marines reach the edge of the captured airstrip that will soon be named Henderson Field. On Chalagi, Gavatu, and Tanambogo, organized Japanese resistance is effectively destroyed, though snipers still lurk. The fleet offshore, though bruised, remains largely intact and continues unloading supplies. But a new danger is already forming. Admiral Fletcher, shaken by aircraft losses and worried about leaving his carriers within range of Rabaul's bombers, decides he must withdraw them soon. On August 8th, he signals Gormley that he intends to pull the carriers back, which will leave Turner's transports and covering cruisers without close carrier air support. At the same time, Vice Admiral Gunishi Mikawa gathers a powerful group of heavy cruisers, light cruisers, and a destroyer at Rabaul and orders them south through the narrow passage between the islands that Allied sailors will soon nickname the Slot. American intelligence picks up only fragments. Army bombers and the submarine S-38 report sightings of Japanese cruisers moving out of Rabaul, but because the base is constantly busy, these reports are treated as routine. Gormley must coordinate reconnaissance flown by MacArthur's long-range bombers, McCain's naval patrol planes, and Fletcher's carrier aircraft. Search plans for August 8th send patrols in broad arcs across the ocean. When Turner examines them, he notices a terrifying gap. The direct route from Rabaul down the Slot toward Guadalcanal is not properly covered. He requests a special search of that corridor. Somewhere between his flagship, shore headquarters, and the seaplane tender assigned to launch the patrol, the order is lost or garbled. No plane ever flies that mission. The slot stays dark. As night falls over Guadalcanal on August 8th, Marines dig in around the new airfield and along the beaches, expecting more air raids and jungle skirmishes. On Chalagi, the last isolated gunshots echo as snipers are hunted down. Offshore, Allied cruisers and destroyers guard the approaches near Savo Island. Their radar is primitive, their crews are tired, and their doctrine for night fighting is untested. They believe they are covering a successful landing. To the north, unseen, Mikawa's cruisers slice through the black water in tight formation. No aircraft shadow them, no submarine warns of their exact approach. The unsearched slot acts as a hidden highway, guiding them toward the anchored Allied ships. In a few hours, that single failure of reconnaissance, that one blind strip of ocean, will help turn a seemingly secure victory into one of the most violent night actions of the Pacific War, and will prove that in this theater, what you do not see can be as deadly as any shell or torpedo. For Yamamoto, for the Marines, and for every sailor in those dark waters, the opening days around Guadalcanal would prove that chance, courage, and tiny invisible mistakes could decide the fate of empires far more than grand speeches in capital cities.